On behalf of the Center for Contemporary History Research of the Polish Academy of Sciences here in Pankow and the German Cultural Forum of Central and Eastern Europe in Potsdam, I welcome you to today's event, the fourth Zernack Colloquium entitled Threats to Cultural Heritage in Wartime, not only the Colloquium Museum example. My name is Ariana Afsari. I work at the German Cultural Forum and I will briefly introduce the course of the evening and our protagonists. For all those who do not yet know the Kulturforum, we deal with the regions of Central and Eastern Europe where Germans or German-speaking people lived or still live today. We want to communicate the history and culture of these regions with publications, podcasts, social media, and events like today. With regard to Ukraine, we also offer history lessons for German schools since 2022. In this respect, I'm very grateful that with Hanna Rudik, Olena Balun, and the moderator Alexandra Lipinska, we were able to win over a personally involved, highly competent panel for our topic. At this point, I would also like to express my special thanks to Mrs. Lipinska's spontaneous stand-in for Beate Störtkuhl, who's unfortunately ill and sends her warmest regards. Today's event is part of the annual theme of the Zernack Colloquium series, Museums, Collections, and the Art Market, Rodent Perspective. The whole series, especially the two events still to come, can be found on the websites of our organizations, the Center for Contemporary History Research and the German Cultural Forum. The Colloquium is named after the famous historian for Central and Eastern Europe, Klaus Zernack. For the good cooperation on this series and the joint conception, I would like to thank Milena Wozniak-Koch and the whole team of the Center for Contemporary History Research. The event can also be followed or viewed later via Zoom and YouTube. Next one will take place on Thursday, the 12th October, and is entitled Between Nation and Region, Between Cultural Policy and Local Identity, Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Poznan from 1904 to 1919. Same time, same place. First, today we will listen to the lecture by Hanna Rudik entitled The Kanenko Museum in Kiev, Post-Colonial Notes to the History of a Key Universal Art Collection in Ukraine. Afterwards, we see a clip from the beginning of the film Erase the Nation by Tomasz Żyrachewski, which was shot in 2022 and premiered in January this year. The film shows the destruction of Ukraine's cultural heritage having been carried out by the Russian troops since 24 February 2022. Then we will hear Olena Balun with her contribution Ukraine Art Center, Art Aid Center, Measures Taken, Perspectives and Challenges. Finally, Ms. Lipinska will moderate the discussion with the two and also integrate questions from the audience. Via Zoom, you can forward questions through the questions and answers button. I will now hand over to Ms. Lipinska and briefly introduce her to you. Alexandra Lipinska studied art history and philology in Netherlandish at the University of Wrocław and at the Catholic University Leuven. She obtained her doctorate with a thesis on South Netherlandish alabaster sculpture in Central and Eastern Europe at the Institute for Art History in Wrocław, where she also worked as a scientific associate. On a similar topic, alabaster in the Netherlandish sculpture of the 16th and 17th century, she co-curated an exhibition at the National Museum in Gdansk. Till 2016, she was junior professor for art history of Central and Eastern Europe at the TU Berlin. Until 2022, she was professor for art history of early modern period at the University of Munich. She habilitated in Berlin on alabaster material studies and works since 2022 as academic senior counselor at the Art History Institute in Cologne. I wish you an enlightening evening.
Thank you very much for the invitation and thank you for having me here. I'm really, I'm not happy that it's not Beate Störtkuhl, but I'm happy to be here to participate in this very important discussion and having a chance to meet you and to introduce you. Our first speaker is Hanna Rudik, who is a guest here in Berlin. She has been since 2002, working in the Kanenko National Museum of Arts in Kiev as a curator of Islamic collection. And also there in this in the National Kanenko Museum, she's been since 2011 a deputy director for the aspects of education and communication. After the outbreak of the war, she, as so many other Ukrainian scholars, was forced to leave Ukraine. And she took part in a fellowship program of the Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz at the Museum of Islamic Art in Berlin. And meanwhile, she developed her new research project on the topic, and since September 22, she's working on the project Reflexive and Ethical Mind, Decolonial Dispositions and Trajectories of Museums of Islamic and Asian Art in Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and Poland. And I have to say, I was wondering why not also in Ukraine, but possibly you will explain it. And this scholarship is possible due to the grant of Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, within the so-called Philipp Schwarz Initiative. So, as much as I understand, forced by a situation which we all didn't really wish to happen at all, you have a chance to work here, and I can suppose only that it is also a kind of an impulse for thinking about the topics you've been thinking already as being active in Kiev. And we are really very much looking forward to listen to your ideas and your thoughts in this concern. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Lipinska, for your introduction and for moderating today's evening. I would like also to thank Centrum Badań Historycznych Polskiej Akademii Nauk w Berlinie i Deutsches Kulturforum Östeuropa Europa for organizing an event on Ukrainian theme and for inviting me as a speaker. I'm very happy that this joining our very important conversation today about Ukrainian cultural heritage at risk at war times. And I'm also very thankful to all who joined us offline and online today. For me, it's a very great privilege always to speak about the Kanenko Museum in Kyiv, the museum that has the richest or allegedly richest collection of foreign art in Ukraine, of world arts. My today's very brief presentation will include a few colonial notes that reflect the current process of the museum's or thinking itself, its collection, and its history. So let's start. This is the Kanenko Museum. The museum didn't officially called the Bogdan and Varvara Kanenko National Museum of Arts. Maybe I'll see the next. Oh, yeah, yes, it's fine. Here you see the main building of the museum in the very heart of Kyiv. A landmark of Kyiv architecture. It was once a private mansion of the museum founders, Bogdan and Varvara Kanenko, the distinguished Ukrainian collectors and philanthropists, leading builders of modern Ukrainian culture. They both were born in the mid-19th century in the Chernihiv province, that is northern Ukraine. Bogdan belonged to an old aristocratic lineage, was one of the Ukrainian hetmans, the rulers of Ukrainian Cossack state, Mikhailo Kanenko, among his ancestors. A lawyer by profession, Bogdan Kanenko in his early 20s took a great interest in all European art and, quoting his memoir, irrevocably decided to collect works of it, end quote. In 1874, he married Varvara Tereshchenko, and the eldest child of Mykola Tereshchenko, a future Ukrainian sugar tycoon and the most generous philanthropist. New nobility, the Tereshchenkos also collected arts, and these two predispositions to art and to charity later played a critical role in the Kanenko's evolution from art amateurs to Kulturprägers. From the mid-1870s on, the Hanenkos were actively collecting art, living in Warsaw and Paris, traveling all around Europe, creating their personal networks of collectors, connoisseurs, dealers, buying and selling artworks, upgrading both their knowledge and the level of their collection. The 1880s saw the peak of their fascination with Western art and their integration into the West European social and cultural fabric. Perceiving themselves as Eastern Europeans, they accepted the culture of Western modernity as a reference model worthy of unquestioned follow. The Hanenkos' cave mansion, erected at the end of the 1880s, epitomized their deep oath to the West. Designed in the style of historicism fashionable in the 19th century Europe, this small palace spectacularly presented the Western artistic canon. Its halls were designed according to the Hanenkos' vision and commission in the styles of the Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque, Rococo, Dutch Burgess style of the 17th century, all grand epochs of Western art history. However, at the very fact of its emergence, the cave house opened a new page in the Hanenkos' personal evolution. Kyiv cultural milieu initiated them into Ukrainian scene, and they started actively collecting domestic archaeology and old icons, local historical antiquities, and later Ukrainian folk art. And it was Bogdan Hanenko who in 1896 headed, and by the end of the century led to success, the ice-breaking cultural and even more so political project, the first public museum in Kyiv, the first museum in Kyiv with Ukrainian content. In the time of especially harsh oppression by the Russian Empire against every strata of Ukrainian national culture, when Ukrainian book printing, Ukrainian press, Ukrainian theater were banned, Bogdan Hanenko obtained personal permission of the Russian Emperor and also a donation from the Imperial Treasury for the public museum in Kyiv with Ukrainian content. This was unthinkable for anyone but the Hanenkos. How did they manage it? Here comes my first post-colonial remark. The Hanenkos were not just passionate collectors and generous philanthropists, generous patrons of culture, as the common knowledge now suggests. They have developed a complex and very clever strategy, built upon their, as I suppose, well-realized dual identity. They played two distinct roles, the one of the loyal little Russians, perfect imperial subjects, Russian-speaking, supporting imperial cultural projects as well as right-wing political parties. This role provided them with sufficient political trust and freedom of action. Another role was the one of Ukrainian heritage and cultural builders, and its anti-imperial, anti-colonial vector became clearly visible due to recent archival research. To sensitize ourselves to the historical context of the Hanenkos' activities, let's read Bogdan's letter of 1900 to Fedor Wolf, the Ukrainian ethnographic scholar who was persecuted by Russia with Ukrainophilia and was living in exile in Paris. I quote, regarding the treasure found in Kyiv, and it deals with about the valuable archaeological finding of silver objects dating to the Grand Princess era of Kyiv. It is too early and dangerous to announce a new find in Russia, as they can claim it to Petersburg. That happened. End of quote. The most valuable art and history objects were seized from imperial provinces like Kyiv to the Metropolitan Royal Hermitage Museum. The Hanenkos covertly resisted this extractive colonial policy, keeping Ukrainian heritage in Ukraine. Yet the first museum of local Ukrainian art and history was not the magnum opus of the Hanenkos as Kulturträgers. To deprovincialize and to modernize Kyiv, they needed to establish a universal museum that would present global history and tell global stories from Kyiv. It was even more unthinkable idea for any subject of empire, let alone Ukraine. And as big stories were an exceptional prerogative of the metropolis. The Hanenkos have found the way to overcome this route. They blatantly bribed then the royal family and gained even more favor and trust, and a new level of freedom. In 1913, they have already announced the new Museum of World Arts to be opened in their private mansion. The same year, they built a huge apartment building next door to the mansion to provide lifelong financial support for the future museum. They dreamt big, envisioning an art history institute with extensive research library to be a part of it. Let's very briefly look inside the Hernandez private gallery that since 1910s was seen by the collectors as a project of the future Universal Museum. A series of old photographs featuring the key halls of the Hernandez private art gallery date back to the early 20th century. This is the Italian hall, adorned in the Gothic style and filled primarily with most valuable pieces of Italian art, but also by the time of the photo featuring a grand Ukrainian Jesus triptych icon, there, here in the niche. Ukrainian icon from the 17th century. Among the variety of European artistic objects we see on the table also a few Chinese artworks here. This big jar, bowl, and vase, and a few sculptures, and incense burners. Included into the European artistic complex, these strangers serve an exotic entertainment for visitors' eyes. The adjoining Italian living room presented another collection of various European art pieces, occasionally diversified by non-European luxurious curiosities, such as Allah's large Syrian brass bowl inlaid with silver and inspired with detailed texts. The Buddhist sculpture on the table is not mixing here. This is the sculpture of the Buddhist monk. And an Ottoman Turkish Austrian chair. And please also pay attention to this small Persian bowl for wine, this brass bowl inlaid with silver and gold, because it belongs already to the next room, the grand gallery, or the gallery. Gallery of painting showing selected pieces of the Old Masters collection. It, as we have already seen, included also one piece of non-European, this time of Persian art, of Islamic art, displayed on a table. In total, there were 9 halls in the Hernandez private art gallery. Their encyclopedic art collection, created in the wake of sincere admiration of the West, reflected a dominant modern Eurocentric worldview built on a clear colonial hierarchy of cultures. In the 1920s and 1930s, the museum researchers joined, it was already a museum in this time. The museum was established by the Bolsheviks in 1919. I will get back to it a bit later. So it was already the museum in the Panenko house. And the museum researchers joined art and archaeology expeditions to the so-called Soviet East, to Turkmenistan, to the Caucasus, to this internal other for the Soviet Slavic Europeans. And the museum wideness acquired new shades. In 1936, the museum was renamed the Museum of Western and Oriental Art. And in full accordance with this colonial binary opposition, it continued its Eurocentric track of dividing collections into more important and less important, into a core and a periphery collections, an elder Western brother and younger Eastern brother, incomparably better staffed and considered more prestigious by the museum workers themselves. The 3 departments of European art, European painting, prints, and sculpture, together with minor arts, during the whole following history of the museum enjoyed structural privileges over the single and all-encompassing, permanently understaffed Eastern art. European collections received the lion's share of researchers' attention, museum space, funding for projects and publications. The museum building went on promoting this supremacy of the Western European culture by stylized architecture and by displayed art collections. The Islamic and Asian art occupied rear rooms on the 2nd and the 3rd floors of the house. Internally colonized within the system of the museum, the non-European collections experienced a double marginalization. That is why there is no surprise that the reduced name Western Museum has been until recently in use of the older generation of Kyivites. This museum cross-cutting through centuries remained almost unchanged until very recent years. In fact, it was the full-scale invasion, this neo-colonial war of Russia, that shook the foundations and triggered the museum's post-colonial self-reflection. The post-colonial approach considers the loss of memory as a phenomenon not less significant than the memory preserved. Reconstructing the history of the Hanenko Museum resembles the building of thin bridges over the vast wasteland of oblivion. The first great loss was the one of the Hanenko's archive. Following the line of the Bogdan's lost will in 1918, Barbara Hanenko transferred the collections and the mansion under the custody of the newly created Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. Yet in early 1919, Russian Bolsheviks established their military rule in Kyiv and forcibly nationalized the collection and the mansion. Varvara, at her 66, accepted this inexorable political change and did her best to prepare the museum for the opening. She rejected all opportunities to emigrate, though her family and closest friends fled abroad. Until her very death, in 1922, she lived in the house taking care of the museum, inviting scholars, and solving maintenance problems. In a week after her death, the entire family archive, business and private, disappeared without a trace. The loss of the central corpus of historical sources marked the beginning of the Soviet cleansing of the capitalists from the new Soviet history of Ukraine. The period of the Hanenko's oblivion lasted until the late 1980s, when the first journal and then book publications appeared. However, despite painstaking efforts of researchers to gather scattered historical evidence from other archives, the context of memory loss remains one of the central for the history of the museum, and especially for the history of its Eastern collection. There were also huge collection losses. In 1825, the museum's unique collection of archaeology and Ukrainian art, of arms and armor, was transferred to the Museum of History. The Russian imperial policy of destruction continued in the new Soviet political scenery. In the late 1920s, the USSR started the fundraising campaign by selling abroad the most valuable museum artifacts. Key items of the collection, like this rare painting by Louis Franz the Elder, Adam and Eve, were forcibly taken from the museum and sold. Other pieces were stolen from the museum by the State Hermitage Museum, the only Soviet museum excluded from the fundraising initiative. For instance, this world-renowned piece of Persian artwork, metalwork, the Hanenko's Akhamanile, dating 1206, and featuring a unique group of a cow milking a calf while being attacked by a lion, cast all together and richly inscribed with valuable historical data, found itself as a result of a shameful fraud in the collection of the Hermitage. No claims from the Kyiv Museum were considered. In 1943, thousands of museum items were looted by Nazis and at their retreat from Kyiv. Part of these collections were returned by the GDR to the Soviet Union, but not to Kyiv. The voids in the scholarship were not less gaping. In the early 1930s, the targeted political repressions against Ukrainian scholars, and particularly Oriental scholars, took place, and many of them were physically exterminated. After the Second World War, the Cold War with its Iron Curtain policy isolated Ukrainian science and culture from the rest of the world until 1990s. The late Soviet decades was the time of the heaviest stagnation in the museum research, the period of the hardest Communist Party control of the museum discourse, the saddest, the most colonial time in the Hanenko Museum history. Despite all efforts of the researcher, the museum eventually became a wasteland of knowledge, particularly in the non-European art history. Significantly, it was at this time that the Russian language, the language of Soviet totalitarianism, dominated museum communication. The enormous gap between the museum knowledge on its collections and the developments of the world art history and museology became obvious on the turn of the 21st century. Then a grand marathon aimed at bridging this gap started. For the non-European collections, this marathon for knowledge took form of a sprint. In 2005, an international grant was awarded to open the Eastern Permanent Gallery. The 2000s and then the 2010s became a period of overwhelming, hectic absorption of knowledge missed over the decades. And at the same time, incredible efforts were made to reimagine the museum as a social institution. The museum developed new educational offer for families, students, people with disabilities, homeless people, introduced elements of accessible space and design, mastered new tools of communication, established new partnerships with international institutions and colleagues, business and governing bodies, social activists, and eventually contemporary artists. The museum's identity and social mission has been continuously redefined. This frantic, supercharged new race for the museum's subjectivity, carried out by a dozen museum curators and managers, in some aspects looked very close to the Hanenko's race for Kyiv cultural subjectivity 100 years ago. Thus, before 2022, the Hanenko Museum in Kyiv was one of the national leaders in collection research, in social responsibility and public popularity. One of my favorites. But it's nothing special because the museum is clearly of the last 10 years a normal view, but it looks very vibrant. And this full of life and vibrantly successful museum had emptied its halls and glass cases on February 24, 2022. This is how the Italian hall, which was mentioned several times today, looked in the spring last year. And in the morning on October 10th, two Russian missiles struck the center of Kyiv. One of them killed 6 people on the Shevchenko Boulevard and wounded 31 people on the Shevchenko Boulevard. And that happened a few hundred meters from the museum. The other hit the kids' playground 50 meters from the museum central entrance. And I will show a video that will explain you and show you how the Italian hall survived this explosion. This is the remnants of the first explosion. This is appalling. This is a painful video. It physically hurts. The broken windows, ceilings, and floors have been very soon restored, repaired, conservated to the great extent due to the immediate, very generous, and precisely targeted aid from organizations like the Germany Netzwerk Kulturgut Schutz Ukraine, the Polish Committee for Aid to Museums of Ukraine, the Lithuanian Strong Together initiative in collaboration with the Lithuanian National Museum, the Allen Foundation, and others. Dr. Alana Bogun was personally organizing this aid from Germany, and she will tell this part of the history of Ukrainian cultural heritage. And I would like to wrap up with a crucial question, which is another more of the museum after the explosion, with a very crucial question. What kind of the museum shall we rebuild? What museum institution will be worthy of the enormous sacrifice Ukrainians have been offering to its existence? Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Nami, for your presentation, fascinating presentation, giving us insight on one side in this very complex history of this collection. within this perpetually changing historical situation and political situation, and at the same time reminding us that this last chapter, very sad chapter, I still remember. I suppose, Helena, you remember too, how shortly after this attack, this explosion, your colleague Julia Vaganova gave us visit, let's say online visit to the museum, and showed us these empty rooms and the series of images and photos of the museum. And I still have, let's say, this feeling in myself very strongly what terrible impact actually it had on all of us. But I think it is very important impact. It is an impact that shows us actually what is happening right now, also right now there, and how this very long tradition you have just presented to us is in danger. But I have some also, I would say, more particular questions connected to your talk. Maybe I will first give myself a chance to pose a few questions, and then we'll open the question also to the public here and also to our public online.
Shall we first show a short film, or will you continue with the questions first?
We can first show the film. Maybe it will give us also some new impacts, some new elements.
It's only 5 minutes.
Wonderful. Let's see the film.
The city of Izium in the Kharkiv region has become an emblem of Russian barbarism in Ukraine. Russian forces detonated the town. After Izium's liberation, the bodies of hundreds of innocent people were found here in mass graves. My name is Zernack. I am a war journalist, and I have been documenting Russian atrocities since the very beginning of the invasion. Russian troops have committed genocide on the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian culture. Putin's actions show a striking similarity to the actions of other dictators, such as Hitler or Stalin, who tried to deprive occupied countries of their national identity by erasing their cultures. Every day, priceless monuments, sacred churches, museums, and archaeological sites of unique importance to the history of not only Ukraine, but the entire multicultural region of Central Europe are threatened by Russian invaders, so that they can rewrite history in the name of the chauvinist ideology of Great Russia. We will travel across Ukraine from east to west, showing some examples of the enormity of this destruction. Our journey starts with a temple in the village of Bohorodishnoye in the Donetsk region, which was destroyed during the enemy show. This is an example of how Russians treat sacred religious places. Kharkiv is one of the cities that has suffered the most from the Russian invasion. I am meeting Roman Kravchenko in one of the districts of the town that endured heavy shelling until very recently. Roman was an archaeologist for years. Now he is a member of the city council responsible for the protection of the historical and cultural heritage of Kharkiv.
Ось пам'ятник, і якраз ці пам'ятники такі показові знімають. За підтримки нашої польської вулиці місто Харків отримало велику кількість мішків, вони були наповнені піском. Ну і ось зроблені такі хоч і доволі, але є конструкції, які зберігають пам'ятники нашого міста, є розвитку.
What is monument is so important for people art?
Це пам'ятник України, який загальний образ України, яка бореться і перемагає. Ну, народу інколи називають Україна міст, в античній міфології була така повідь України міст. А поруч це будинок, який зараз говорили це готель, який на початку 20 століття мав назву Росії. Там руйнування взагалі так стрічі. Так, і все подивіться, була завалена шматками якимись там скла, найрізноманітнішими речами, які повилітали, там, все те, що робили, тому все так було варіант, все тут, звичайно, все це було потрібно, але не різно, це була просто це була така якась апокаліпсис, тобто це закінчення, дивіться, куди я потрапив. Це Харків, це Харків, який завжди був чистенький, який завжди була багато, це було. І, звичайно, те, що тут було,
Well, I think the film speaks for itself, only shows the whole scale of the terrible destruction and really intended destruction. I think that's really terrible about it, that we see what we could also actually notice already in so many cases, that it's not only, let's say, the plan of general destruction, but also like very specifically cultural sites, sites which are important for Ukrainian identity would be attacked and destroyed. And that's something what I think the international community has to really react on, and happily enough reacted so far, maybe not strong enough. But that is giving also, I think, the very important, let's say, background, or even I would say it is a foreground right now for what you were talking about the history of the museum. But you posed a very important question at the end, having this very painful experience right now, at the same having an opportunity, let's say, which you didn't wish to have a special situation of discussing these topics also with your colleagues here in Germany. You have the special opportunity to think about the future of the museum. And I hope you would agree that thinking about the future is always connected on a very strong reflection on how really what were the intentions of the first commissioners and founders of the museum. So in this concern, I have first a few questions maybe, and then we will also proceed to the future, which is of course so important in this context. I was really thinking about when you were presenting the figure of Kanenko, and at the same time you were addressing the colonial thoughts and colonial criticism in this context. I have to say, I was thinking about the category of mimicry. While you were talking about him on one side actually reproducing the scheme that we know from the whole movement of European and Western museums of the 19th century, the ambition of collecting Western art as something giving, let's say, the nation the position which is equal to other nations in Europe, and at the same time this interest in Oriental art. and trying, let's say, to find politically also the position that would allow him that all. So in a way, finding a costume, I would say, allowing him for this. Would you say that this category indeed could be used for these very particular collectors?
Probably yes, it might be used. I also use a category of a term of the self-colonizing, which was coined by Klaus, a Bulgarian thinker, colonial thinker, art historian, meaning that it implies the voluntary adopting other cultures, frames and thinking and structures of knowledge and structures of aesthetic sphere and so on. It can be at least tested at the Hanenko's historical material. Actually, this topic is quite a new topic of research for me, and I'm not so eager to imply every theoretical tool to it. I want first to read letters, those I could find, and also other documents, some indirect evidences that I can that can match and add to the picture. But what is for me, what is really striking is that, and what as I as an historian of Hanenko's, I'm actually working on the history of Hanenko since 2012, and it's one of my directions of research in the museum. I've often been asked whether they were patriots of Ukraine and how happened that they were so tightly integrated into the imperial elite, and at the same time did museums in Kyiv, the Ukrainian museums in Kyiv were thinking of Ukraine. Yes, it's this consideration, thinking about it, made me come to the conclusion that their particular role at the court, let's say, was a conscious strategy. It looked like a conscious strategy, because at the same time they were very closely connected and had common interests and common projects with Ukrainian national builders, with Ukrainian Ukrainophils who were, if not persecuted, then controlled by the empire. But the Hanenko's managed to be there and here at the same time. And the key is their, let's say, driving intention was to bring culture, to bring civilization, the core culture, to this semi-periphery that they were aware, the Ukraine or Kyiv, at least they were talking predominantly about Kyiv and the central Dnieper River region. That was the land they felt responsibility for, they belonged. Bring here this standard of culture and make Kyiv a rival to St. Petersburg, to counter this colonial destruction, to counter this colonial humiliation that Kyiv suffered. There is a very interesting, very complex, very hybrid identity and strategy, but that's what they were, to my opinion, at this moment.
And I think that it is exactly to study this so important, because I think they might be a very interesting case study to present and also to reflect on the hybridity of identities and of accepting the fact that it's not always black or white, and it's that it could be really a double or triple identity that could play a role in this situation. And it is not my role to, let's say, formulate the program for the future, but I think that that might be also a a point to think about the future of Ukrainian museums, to have in mind this multiple identity, which is
And to communicate it.
Yeah.
Our task now to build a Ukrainian narrative, historical narrative, scholarly narrative. We have to do research of what we have at our hands or in other archives, and if we lack the Hernandez archive, we're looking for evidences of their activities outside the museum, outside Kiev, outside Ukraine, and so on. We have to know exactly what happened, not to follow the Russian or Soviet narratives that were imposed on the Ukrainian history and on our identity. Yes, so this is definitely the power of the future. Not only to do research, but as a museum, as a public institution, to communicate and to discuss it, not to tell, but to pose questions for discussion, to engage different parties to discuss it. Yes, you're absolutely right.
I have a second question, which might be maybe a detailed question in your eyes, but looking at this Italian room, where you noticed that there were like a lot of Italian works of art, but there is also a very important icon there. And at the same time, you were talking about the development of the collection into a collection of, on one side, Western art, and on the other side, Oriental art. What was this icon for Kanenko? Did it belong to, let's say, where would you suppose he would, or what did indeed positioned Ukrainian art or Byzantine art from Ukraine?
It was a European culture for them, definitely. Definitely, it was the collections they were systemically compiling the Ukrainian art, starting from the mid-1890s. They were really keen in Ukrainian history, Ukrainian archaeology, Ukrainian history of Ukrainian civilization. And Hanenko discussed with Fedor Wok, who was also not only ethnographer, but anthropologist and archaeologist, the tiniest details of the way the bodies were buried in this or that archaeological epochs along the Dnieper river region. So the Hanenkas really were very keen in it. And Orara Hanenka adored Ukrainian old icons and Ukrainian folk art. And the core of the collections of several national museums in Kyiv, Ukrainian art, Ukrainian folk art, are built in Hanenka's former Hanenka's collections. For them, it was the part of the Western history of art, of European history of art. They definitely, and in his memoir, that was the most manuscript of the memoir by Bogdan was found in during the renovation of the house in the 1990s behind the upholstery of the wall. Someone hid it there. So it's the only piece of his autograph, his manuscript in the museum archive today. He suggested that it is very interesting to combine the old Italian art and old Greek tradition art, including Byzantine and Ukrainian old icons, into the one gallery to see the connections. So they both were really keen in history. They were not just collectors, not right, just building the capital of art or whatever, or just indulging themselves in beautiful and luxurious objects. They were really keen in understanding the history of art. Yes, and so for me, this part of the exhibition, it fits into this European canon. Well, there's inclusions of Chinese, cloisonné and incense burners, and also there were a few Turkish, Ottoman velvets and Persian Persian plates, painted walls up high on the wall above the mantelpiece. They could not be seen, but they were just as untold. So that this thing, and of course, it was very typical, very normal for Ukraine, for European collectors first, absolutely. But that's what is interesting, that this museum was totally modeled according to the European models, yes. And they really were very vast-centric. They were Eastern Europeans, but they were vast-centric people.
Yeah, I think we can learn from the studies very much. I would open the discussion now.
If I may, thank you for this wonderful paper. I remember talking to you also during the conference. We had already an opportunity to discuss those moments, patterns of collecting by Kanienko. And I remember coming to the let's say gender topic, like this was Barbara who was collecting the Ukrainian art, and this was the Bogdan who was more responsible for the Western art. It's true, yes.
Yes. By now it looks like it was true, and Barbara was very active. She was one of the first female leaders of Ukrainian modern culture. She was very active as organizer of museums, as collector, as organizer of the so-called arts and crafts movement in Ukraine, artisan movement of producing and preserving the Ukrainian folk culture, producing the ornaments and the technologies to preserve. Yes, her part was mostly old items. She was writing letters that she adores, admires them, and feels the deepest pleasure contemplating them. And also thought. This was a passion.
So, like, coming to this really broad topic of collecting and identity, this is really so inspiring and having so many different layers, like not only the national aspect, which is of course currently so important, but also the gender aspect, like female collecting, which is very often like somehow a bit disrespected in terms of comparison with men's collecting, considered as a typical male's activity, yes. And this is really interesting how yes, what was her role and how she defined her art collecting. You've mentioned also this let's say subversive strategy, that they were loyal to the Russian emperor, but at the same time working for the Ukrainian nation. And this reminds me a bit of another subversive strategy, mainly from here, from Berlin, like Jewish collectors who were collecting French modern art. They were bringing this to Berlin in the time of Wilhelminian era, where the national German art was so promoted, and they were in the concept of, for example, Weronika Grodziński, they were buying and bringing this French art as a sort of manifestation for their let's say their republican idea, and in contrary to Wilhelminian conservatism. So this was also it's just a remark. I don't know if it fits one to this example, but if we think about collective strategies and what sort of ideas are behind, yes, what sort of manifestation of one's attitude behind just collecting is hidden. I think it's interesting to see how those models appear in different parts of Europe, or maybe even America. And here we have, I think, similar situation, like Ukrainian could be considered as a minority, just like Jews in, for example, or Poles or any other minority, national minority elsewhere, yes. And just shortly coming to your last really remarkable sentence, And this notice that the situation, this awful and so painful situation of war was triggering the study on colonial, post-colonial situation of the museum, and this question, this open question, how will the museum look in the future? Could you elaborate a bit on what sort of reflections or post-colonial perspective it brought? Like, was it only in terms of 19th century colonization, or also, for example, to the communistic era? Yes, could you maybe say something more on that?
Yes, of course. I have recently read this old Mirzoev article about empty the museum, decolonize the curriculum, and I was sadly thinking that yes, it is to be emptied. We are now, I mean, saying we, I mean my colleagues in the museum and our team, we are now at the crossroad, and we really right now do not have the future museum, because it was for so long such a rigid Eurocentric museum, which we still are continue to like disentangle, and will be disentangling it for very long. And it's not only, of course, about the Hungarian West centrism, which now, due to many publications, can be contextualized quite well in its period, and even in the, let's say, Eastern European and Central European context, Western European context, but also about the 1920s, which saw the upsurge of the scholarship in Ukraine. It was the first decade when the museum, when the knowledge about this collection became kind of scholarly knowledge, became based on the scholarship, on Western, again, Western scholarship, but also on the new Soviet developments in scholarship, which were very high in their achievements. But at the same time, as I said, there were lots of expeditions to Soviet East with the archaeological items or architectural pieces of the 16th century just taken from the ground and brought to Kyiv. And this very gesture is very colonial gesture, because no one been asked and no one been cared. It was very natural for that period. The people who did that, they were then repressed and persecuted as Ukrainian nationalists, bourgeois nationalists, Orientalists, and all that by the Stalin regime. But so it's all very complicated things that cannot be, you know, simply ethically judged in any situation and for any concrete person and concrete action. But it's the point for discussion, and this discussion is to be brought to the museum and to the Ukraine, to Ukrainian society. Definitely, this is what our museum is, I suppose, is sure, and we have a consensus that this should be the museum and the exhibition. Let it be not permanent exhibition, which I really doubt like the concept at all, but let it be the test exhibition with a question post, with some histories retold from the multiple perspectives, and the questions posed, and the programs of discussions on professional, for professional community, for wider public, for children, for teens, whatever. That's probably is the only but quite important feature on the future news, because also the 30s and then the Second World War and the part of the museum team collaborated to save the building and to save the collection. Then again, in the late 40s, they were persecuted, imprisoned, and killed in prisons for that. And then the stagnation period started with this Iron Curtain and isolation. And I didn't mention, but it was the period when the Hermitage scholars came to the museum for consultations, because the museum researchers didn't have any other source of new knowledge on the history of the collection. Only the Hermitage or Pushkin Museum or Oriental Art Museum from Moscow, they came and told, and they never tried to explain and ground, to make reference. They just told, no, that's not 13th century, that's 14th century. And that's what is written into the museum documentary. And they were not also asked and insisted on to ground their ideas. They were luminaries, just prophets of the knowledge. And the situation with this knowledge lasted until 2000. This is very, again, very colonial situation, which also is to be re-sought from this perspective. And the story retold. This is part of the Soviet power strategy for the peripheries, to tame the peripheries, especially such an dangerous peripheries, such a strong national strength. So, and again, 2000 and 2010, we were so absorbed with this task of catching up with everything, both collection knowledge, conservation measures, public work, education, museology, inclusion, accessibility, whatever, that we just couldn't hear any signal of decolonial thinking. And besides, in Kyiv and in key cities of Ukraine, the Orange Revolution and the Dignity Revolution was a very pro-Western revolution. And was critical knowledge, was practical information was not heard, was not perceived.
It wasn't the time for
It was
questions.
The question was because it was our hope to finally escape this post-Soviet Ukraine, to redo it. And I can tell it's the whole week about all these different historical periods of the conflicts of the hybrid Ukrainian coloniality and resistance to this coloniality. And this is what the museum is to reflect upon and to share within the society.
Well, the only thing I can say is we wish you that you will have very fast an opportunity to use this reflection for your collection, for your public. But before we will close the discussion, I have to ask if there are any questions from our public online.
No.
Are there any questions here? If not, then maybe we'll proceed now. Thank you in the first place again for sharing with us all your insights and very interesting reflection on the situation of Kanenko Museum as an example of course, all museums in Ukraine will have this very hard job of reflecting on its future in the following years. But I would propose now that we will go forward to our second presentation, which will be given by Dr. Alena Balun, who is an art historian and independent curator, and also a chairwoman of Association, Rosenheim Association. And we've met about 1.5 years ago, I think, in connection with constituting, let's say, organizing the meanwhile institution that you mentioned already, a Ukrainian Art Aid Center. At the moment, we were all shocked by the situation in Ukraine and noticed from the very beginning that the help is really needed, and you joined the steering team and committee of this organization. But we cannot forget that you are a very important element of your expertise in the whole work for the Ukrainian museums was your Ukrainian background, but also your scholarly background as a scholar. Your PhD was also connected with the Ukrainian folk art and some aspects which I can just quote here. You've been working on the image of Cossack Mamai in the earth of Ukrainian avant-garde. So also, let's say, a way how the national motifs were reflected on by the avant-garde artists. And for the last almost 2 years, you've been working very intensively to support our colleagues in Ukraine, and we are very much looking forward to your presentation, telling us a few words about, or more than few words about your work.
Thank you very much for introducing me. Thank you very much to you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. I'm very glad to be here tonight, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. And thank you, dear Hannah, for presenting your research. It was very interesting. And Zernack Museum means a lot to me because 19 years ago I wasn't even there. And what you showed the video, it happened a week after I left Ukraine, and a week before I went with the Julia Gargano through the halls, and it was something that I just couldn't get into my head. I saw it also in the news. So I will tell you briefly about our network, the Ukrainian Art Aid Center. Our goal is to support Ukrainian cultural institutions that have to protect, secure, or restore their collections, their monuments and archives in the war that Russia started against Ukraine. The UAAC was founded at the very beginning of March 2022, fairly immediately after the start of the full-scale invasion. And it is not an association, it is actually really a network where many different organizations operate, including research institutes, foundations, firefighter associations, restorers, museums, logistics companies, and art dealers, and so on. Can we please have a second? Thank you. I have just made a list of all the institutions, and there are even more who act there. And we do not operate only in Germany. We have very good partners, for example, in Switzerland, as the IPOM Schweiz and the Foundation SKKG Winterthur, and also in Austria, it's IPOM Austria and OSCE Vienna. We are very thankful that OSCE is helping our trucks which transport humanitarian goods on the Polish-Ukrainian border. And for individual measures, we had very good cooperation with the NGOs from Poland and Romania, so it's very, very big network. And from March to July 2022, we operated on a donation basis. We'll just tell you a little bit about the structure. And as we were quite successful, Federal Government for Culture and Media, BKM, provided us with 3 million euros from July to December last year. And with this money, we were able to provide help to Ukraine at a really large scale. And this year we had to wait a little bit longer for help, but thanks God, the Federal Foreign Office provided us also with 3 million euros from the end of July. And so far, the state has entrusted us a total of 6 million euros for humanitarian aid, work and culture in Ukraine. And both grants were possible thanks to the cooperation with the BKWE Oldenburg. It's the Institute for German Culture and History in Eastern Europe, where Beate Stortko also works. Unfortunately, she's not here tonight. And I would also like to mention the sponsors, among them the Hasso-Plattner Foundation and the Ernst von Siemens Stiftung and the Foundation SKKG Winterthur, who have also entrusted us several tens of thousands of euros, and even more. Hasso-Plattner is now sponsoring a major project dealing with restoration in Ukraine. I will tell you some words about it later. We are very grateful for all this. And I would like to give you some figures, just to mention what we have done until today. First of all, the deliveries we have made to Ukraine, there were 41 trucks, big trucks of 40 tons and 90 cubic meters, 3 Deutsche Bahn containers by rail, several buses, and it all makes more than 300 tons of humanitarian goods, and they were distributed in Ukraine to estimately 900 institutions. We have been working since the beginning with Ukrainian logistics companies, which was very successful because they go directly to the country, to Kiev and to Lviv. And the goods are distributed there by our Ukrainian coordinators in Lviv and Kiev, and then even further shipped to different places in Ukraine, even to the front with smaller transports. And on the photo, you see our coordinator, Irina Nikiforov from Kiev in this storage. So we have also external project partners who are co-responsible for larger projects. That's the big list you can see there. And in the list, there are organizations which were involved last year and also this year still. And most of these projects were dealing with the upgrading of the storages and of the museum spaces, and also about digitalization. Digitalization, it means scanning, producing 3D scans of the architectural monuments and some collections, and also photographing them for the worst case, and also making the scans of the archival documents. And there are a lot of project partners in Ukraine. Some of them is Skyron. You have seen their exhibition now in Dortmund, and it is quite an interesting young initiative. They work on the list and are trying now to make the full list of the monuments that should be scanned by order of their importance. So we keep supporting them. And I would like to give you some larger examples, so to make it a little bit more illustrative. And we have supported, I have mentioned the libraries and the archives, not only with the digitalization. A big problem is, of course, the fire protection. And here you can see fireproof cabinets that we have purchased for the Vernadsky Library in Kiev. This is one of the 20 largest libraries in the world. So you can imagine what an important heritage is there to protect. Such a cabinet is quite a logistical challenge. It takes a long time to make it, it's very expensive, and such a cabinet weighs half a ton. So it's always a challenge also for Ukrainian colleagues to unload such a truck, because most of the staff in Ukraine now are women in museums and older men, because younger men are at the front. Culture institutions are mostly situated in the historic city, where the streets are quite narrow, and you need space not only for a truck, but normally also for a crane or a forklift. So entrances to the buildings are also not very wide, and sometimes you don't have a lift, sometimes you just have a staircase, which is also not very wide. I'm telling it because it requires always a lot of organization also in Ukraine. It's not like we send help and there is a professional team to get it down from the truck. No, it's always quite a lot of work, and they volunteer normally for that. So it's unbelievable actually what do people do to save their culture in Ukraine. And on the other slide here, you see some large generators with a weight for 2 tons apiece. We sent a very big number of generators and power stations to Ukraine, and because Russia targeted power networks of Ukraine in autumn, in winter, even in spring. And now we are very concerned that we can face a very similar situation because, okay, we have experience from the last year, but nevertheless, in museums and in cultural institutions, you need electricity not only for light or for computers, but also for the indoor climate to keep it constant. And also for alarm systems. Safety during power cuts is a very important issue there. And generators here are very large. We have bought 4 of them of that kind, 2 for the opera houses in Lviv, it's here, and in Odessa, and 2 for the museums of folk architecture and open air museums. This one is in Lviv by Kiev. It's the largest in Ukraine, of an area of more than 100,000 hectares, so it's quite big. The Lviv Opera House was able to continue its work over the winter, not at least thanks to that generator, and we're quite proud of that. And I will stay with the energy issue at the moment. And it was quite an interesting case. For the power supply of one of the most important UNESCO sites in Ukraine, the Cave Monastery, the Kiev-Pечерsk Lavra, we were able to find an ecologically attractive solution, because it's quite a big area with a big number of churches and museums, and it's quite complex, and they are all heated electrically. And in order to provide electricity there, we financed a solar system on the roof of one of the technical buildings, and that could bring them through the winter also. Well, and what is still the major problem is the structural damage of the monuments. On the photo from the October the 10th, 2002, what Hannah has already mentioned, when several missiles hit downtown Kiev, 2 of the missiles in the neighborhood with the several scientific, educational, and museum institutions, and they stay quite close to each other. And there is also Kanenko Museum, and it's an area of actually 2.5 streets with great cultural symbolic significance. And the attack on that quarter was not a collateral damage, or it was not a mistake. It was a very good planned act of a symbolic, sadistic thing. And well, there were damaged 6 museums, 2 main buildings of the National Tarasichenko University, the University Library, several buildings of the National Academy of Science, because there is a whole street with the Academy of Science. And we were very lucky that we could react quickly and could send several trucks with building materials to cover the windows and the roofs from the weather, from the moisture. And we could do that in the first days. After that, it happened immediately. And the problem with the damage of the buildings is still very acute. So I'm coming to the current challenges and the problems. Especially it's very acute in the places which are close to the front or close to the border with Russia or with Belarus. And Chernihiv is one of the cities which suffered lots of attacks since the beginning of the war and also the occupation. And it was on the August 19th this year. It's the historic city center, and it was massively hit by the rockets. And the historic center there is very beautiful, it's very old, and it is a candidate for the UNESCO list. And among the heavily damaged monuments is the National Drama Theatre for Music. And the damage is enormous, especially on the roof, in the spectator hall and in the foyer. Moreover, more than 90% of the windows are broken, and you need an emergency protection of the building, and you need it as quick as possible. And the estimate costs for the protection like that are very high, and we will definitely help. Unfortunately, we cannot invest the whole amount that is needed at the moment, because our funds are also limited, because we have divided them between the several projects. What is needed here at the moment is actually an extension of the grant, to tell the truth. And the need is enormous, because if we do not make that emergency roof and that emergency protection before winter, before the wet and the cold season, you know what will occur? Huge humidity problem, which would cause further structural damage. And there is a question, shall we manage to save it? And well, since I have mentioned the humidity, there's also still a big problem with the packaging and with the securing the goods, because packing materials are not always permeable to air. They do not breathe. And spaces for emergency storage are not optimally air conditioned. And if you have problems with electricity and with heating, the moisture damage is actually inevitable. That's the problem. And when you start heating, sometimes it's too dry if you have problems with the ventilation. And it's like a never-ending story with the temperature fluctuations, because unfortunately, we have sent hundreds of humidifiers and dehumidifiers to Ukraine. It's not enough of a solution, because in many cases, the damage through the mold has already occurred. And what we have here on the picture is the example from the Kharkiv branch of the National Restoration Center. The colleagues there are currently carrying out the conservation and restoration measures for paper part of the gospel from the early 18th century, from the collection of Izium Museum. You have seen what was done to the city. And the paper has suffered very significant damage. There are more than 300 sheets, and it was due to the improper storage during the occupation of Izium. And almost all the sheets need to be supplemented by paper pulp. And the material they need there is called Holytex, and it is expensive. It is a lack of that in Ukraine, and that's why they cannot do it very quickly, but it is needed to do that quite quickly. It's a non-woven polyester fiber, you can describe it like that. We have ordered already the needed amount, and we are waiting at the moment for the delivery of the material in Berlin, because after Corona, you have sometimes the problem with the deliveries with those chains, which if it is not made in Germany, and sometimes even not in Europe. So it is also still a challenge, but we hope that it will come soon to Berlin to send it to Ukraine. And restoration is also a very important topic, because after the war, during the reconstruction, I'm trying just to be optimistic and talking about the time after that, Ukraine will need a lot of specialists in that subject. And that is why restoration subject is very important to academies, to the colleges all over Ukraine, and already a very large number of the students which come from the occupied and contested territories study now in Lviv and in Kiev. And what they need good equipment, because there are lots of people, and they need also exchange, professional exchange, which is very important. Partner Foundation has planned a very large project for this. Several restoration tables will be made for the academies and restoration centers in Kiev, Kharkiv, and in Lviv. Such a table is quite an expensive thing, from 30 to 50,000 euros. And it is quite important to do that, and we are very thankful that they want to help. And it is also very important to give that exchange. And we are planning maybe in future to make some common workshops to make that the scholars from Ukraine and the students from Ukraine come to Germany and so on. But it's a plan now. And we have now to talk, if we talk about the restoration, there is some, and about the structural damage, there is an interesting new thing that occurred, a new problem, which is actually not surprising, but the colleagues from Kiev, they started dealing with it recently. Even if the moments are not hit directly by the missile, or even if the rocket doesn't hit nearby, sometimes when the air defense shoots it down, there are debris, and even if they fall far away, there is an explosion wave which spreads on quite a big area, and that causes movement in the structure of the buildings and in the walls. And you do not see that cracks immediately, but after some time. And what do we have here? It's the Perolid Open Air Museum, where we have Ukrainian folk architecture. From all Ukraine, there were historical houses which were put there in that area, and they do not have a foundation. And if you have constantly those explosion waves, after some time, the cracks were that occurred in that structure, that movement, and also the thatched roofs, they were moved. And now the colleagues are discussing the topic, what to do, also with the professionals from the countries which have experienced both the natural disasters like earthquakes and also the wars. And one of the ideas, as far as I know, was just to remove the roofs. But the problem is, inside of every house is a small museum, because they are full with folk art, textiles, and carvings. And even if they are stored somewhere else, you cannot remove everything. So they are discussing the measures, and as far as we get information, we will try to help. And a very similar problem we have at the St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. For the same reasons, fine cracks appeared there. It's nearby the cross here, and yeah, the region. And well, this cathedral is a UNESCO monument. It is partly a Byzantine structure, and how deep the cracks are and what to do with them and how to proceed. For this purpose, we sent special scaffolding, and it is now arrived in Kiev, and also some photo equipment. We are waiting for the information about the measures also here, and we are very eager to help. And these were just some examples in a short time to give you some impression about what we do and what problems do we face. If you have any questions, I will be glad to answer them, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for presenting this work, which I'm acquainted with, but not to our public, and it is really so impressive what has been done so far, and at the same time, all the challenges that are still ahead. That's of course something that I think we have to reflect on. Again, I would say exactly as you presented it, that war actually was an impulse, let's say, to rethink the situation in the Ukrainian museums. And in this case, I still remember this first month where we were also reflecting on the fact that we have forgotten in Europe, what does it mean actually to protect art in the wartime? Of course, at the same time, in the whole world, there are situations where art would be in danger, and it is so far away that we have forgotten it, and now it is really so, we really feel it on our skin, let's say, how dramatic it could be and what a challenge it for the restoration specialists, for art historians and journalists. Thank you again for your great work, really. But I think we should use the time also for questions maybe from our public. I would have mine. Any?
Yes, I agree definitely with Sandra. Really, congratulations on your work. It's very important, and it's unfortunately resembles so much the situation how it encountered after the First World War and the Second World War, as this is my field of research. So it brings some flashbacks from the archives and some calls in the newspapers of the society to invent the rights. So which you mentioned, digitalization is a sort of inventalization. As I understood, right, this means digitalization of architecture and also works of art, like artifacts, smaller artifacts. And will this eventually bring some sort of database or something like this, which will then, after the war, will be used as a source for possible reconstruction in terms of rebuilding architecture and eventually conservating artworks which were damaged? Yes.
Well, I hope that there will not be that much damage, but yes, sure, you're right. So they do it, of course, also for the worst case. There is also a problem that Ukrainian institutions were not that digitalized before. There was lack of equipment, there was lack of database and so on, because it was because of the financing. It was also the problem that because it was not digitalized, because there was not a database there, it was not well known also in Europe, because it was like a circle.
So you mean that Ukrainian art was not that well known in Europe?
Yes. The archives, the topics, and so on. Because as I have written my thesis on Ukrainian art, it was not easy to work also in the libraries, because they had their catalogs on paper and not in the computers. And the work that is done now, well, it is because of the war, and it's tragic enough, but they are trying to make the work that was not done before the war, and they are also in a big hurry for the worst case if there will be big damage. So we hope that after the war we can just use that with
with a good profit also.
And I could also add that everybody can actually contribute to this work, because there is also a movement of Wikipedia and Wikipedians, and also groups here in Germany, but I think all around the world, people who now in the free time, let's say, contribute to writing this short information on artworks and monuments in Ukraine, because I think it is a very important aspect that the international community, also of, let's say, lay people, yeah, not only professionals, contribute to this knowledge and preserving this knowledge. Which brings me to also to the question of, you already mentioned there's a lot of your actions, let's say, your help was possible thanks to people on site who supported museum staff, also people from, let's say, outside teams of the museum. How would generally this help from other countries, from Germany, not only, would be perceived, let's say, in Ukraine? You have also like daily contact with your colleagues, but I think that also in connection with what you've been talking about before about the public and the museums, it is also of I think this aspect of how the broader public looks at this situation, and does it also constitute a part, let's say, of the broader public way of thinking about the identity and importance of cultural heritage and part of the identity? Does it change anything?
Well, how it's being perceived with big gratefulness. So they are very thankful for that. Moreover, Germany is a country which hesitates a lot, but not in the help for the culture. And that is what makes it very positive. And I think that our coordinator, well, yes, she said that Germany was that help after the 10th of October was so quick, and Germany was the first country which reacted so quickly to that. It was maybe her particular experience, but I think it gives quite a realistic opinion on how people perceive this help. And for the other part of the question, well, culture makes their identity. It is what it is, it's about, and people fight there and give their lives for actually. And it is, you do not necessarily have to work in art as a curator, but art makes a lot of our daily life. It's the architecture, it's the design, it's the style, it's the information about that, which makes a lot of pleasure, even if we sometimes do not notice it. And in Ukraine, they appreciate it now even more than before, because culture was always very important to Ukrainians, which maybe if you do not have too much money, you always can go to a museum and enjoy something which is very precious, and now it is endangered.
Folklorics are not available.
And they go to museums even if they are empty. They are actually not empty, because it is for them something, it's at the moment, it's like empty museum is somehow naked and vulnerable, and one feels connected. Then it has become some other type of luxury, because if you can go there and it's very healing, and it makes happy at the moment, and it is something that is from a normal life from before the war, when you could enjoy something. So it's a very important thing. That's what I mean with the identity also.
Yeah, definitely. And what you said about German reaction, I'm Polish myself, so I was also being in Germany, living in Germany, observing also the reaction of Polish people. I would say we have very tragic past in all this triangle, let's say, and very traumatic common experiences. And again, if there could be something good told about the whole situation, is maybe that some people showed an attitude which maybe can heal some of us. But at the same time, I think it is also a very important occasion, again, to put it on the table. Let's say that we're not not only cover it with this surface and layer of, oh, now we are the best friends, but also to discuss this very important topics of the identity, because I think that it would be definitely also the intention of Beate Stadtgruppe, who would be here for many years. We are, she especially, also doing the group of Polish and German art historians, and we are very much discussing the problem of the shared heritage. Yeah, shared heritage of Polish and German people in the regions like Silesia, like Pomerania, and so on. We have our shared heritage in Galicia, let's say, and I think that I was just wondering if you, maybe both of you, could, if these very particular actions, this very concrete actions of the Ukraine Idol Dance Center, and this, let's say, rethinking the concept of the museum, if you think that this notion of shared heritage could be something that could be also helpful here in the construction, let's say, of the new way of thinking about Ukrainian heritage.
I think it's not even helpful, but fundamental. I don't know if there is any heritage that is not shared in the world, in the history of culture, to be honest. Well, claiming Ukrainian heritage from the Russian appropriated heritage is actually the move that to make the previously nominated as Russian or Soviet heritage shared. Nobody tells that Malevich is Ukrainian, and that's it.
But we also I've heard people say
No, but yes,
that's why
there are many suggestions, but I refer now to the scholar community. I haven't.
Yeah.
As I know, the researchers in knowledge add Kyiv aspect to his Polish, Russian, and other aspects. So we are to claim that this history has also the Ukrainian part, when it has, when there are evidences and there are documents, and this is what makes history so, let's say, when the lessons of history could be learned, negotiating, discussing, and communicating the shared history in the history. So for me, it's a very strong and powerful concept of thinking history. But at the same time, I can notice in some museums some instrumentalization of this concept. Not quite equal to the sides. So the shared history can be told by one side, and it's the one perspective on shared history. So this sharedness could also be unilateral or multilateral. So what is really important is not the term itself, but the fact that it's a multi-vocal discussion around the history,
really,
and it's a dialogue of unequal terms and the dialogue of respect, and with intention to gain some consensus, at least temporary consensus, but some consensus. And again, it's not a dialogue of politicians or dilettantes. It's a dialogue of historians or people who really professionalize.
With the hope that politicians will listen to what we have to do.
May I add something to Miladic, because I blame him Ukrainian also, because it doesn't make him less or more. He is what he is, and he would never become what he became without that Ukrainian part. Of course, that's the thing, and I think it's not the problem that Ukraine didn't want to share. And as you said, it is absolutely right. So claiming some artists also to be Ukrainian means decolonization, actually, because what you described at the very beginning about Hanenko with that dual identity, it is quite a good picture of a Ukrainian, reflecting Ukrainian mentality in that tragic situation. He was giving a small Russian, it is actually an offensive Russian description for the Ukrainian, because Russians do not want to talk about Ukraine even now. It's what they tell on their television. If they would win that war, they would just prohibit their word, Ukraine and Ukrainians, and they use the word small Russians. And that is what was actually the problem in the Russian Empire. And playing that role to get over some privileges, it was actually, it is something very tragic from what we are liberated now, from what we are getting liberated now. And that is maybe some point about the Museum of the Future. Getting liberated from that point of the mentality of the minority is very important for the future museums. Yes. Yeah.
We have one message. Yeah. Read it only a comment.
Yeah,
but it's maybe a colleague of you. Thank you so much to Hannah Ludik and to Olina Balun for the most interesting presentations. Thanks to Alexandra Lipinska for the great moderation. This conference shows how it's important to go on with the protection of culture in Ukraine. Best regards from Ecom, Switzerland, Fabienne Ellen. Thank you for the commentary.
No, I just wanted to make a brief remark, as our previous seminar was also on post-colonial perspective. This was a great meeting with Magdalena Wróblewska from the Warsaw University. She was talking on Warsaw ethnological museums, and one very interesting point she had made at that time, I still remember, was she was saying like the decolonization starts, or the part of the colonization is the mental work and bringing back the object, but the most important thing is to decolonize the mentality. And I think this is the key point in the whole thing, yes, and triggering this process, which is starting and maybe trying to find still some good aspect in this tragic situation, is that the process which is starting should eventually lead to liberation from this post-colonial thinking and perspective in Ukraine, which we are wishing and hoping for.
Thank you. If I just add this aspect of shared heritage with respect to your activities, I would say that it means not only claim as is or acknowledging a part of this as a part of identity, but also it means also responsibility. I think that what is shown right now, hopefully will be continued, is the fact that acknowledging that Ukrainian heritage is a part of European heritage, global heritage, of course, and that's why it should be just self-explaining that the German government and other governments contribute to this preservation, and I think that's a very important point, and it's also the way how it should be understood, in my opinion.
Should be self-understood.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Hazel Plattner is from Berlin Museum, yes? This is this foundation, yes?
Yeah. It's been almost 2 hours, indeed. So I think I would wrap up now the discussion, because it's been really already very exhaustive, I think, and very interesting. Thank you again for great presentations, important presentations. Thank you for organizing this here, that we could Center of Historical Studies of Polish Academy, we could discuss these topics. And also, I think it's a very important aspect that because it is presented right now online, as I could understood, it will be also available also further on different channels. So also this topic could be also studied, let's say, later by the broader public. And I think it's a very important part and of the whole program to make it available for everybody. Thank you again. Again in October, there is the next meeting.
Yes, on the
12th of October.
We are then having discussion seminar on the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Poznan. And our following guests will be Dr. Kamila Kurkiewicz from Poznan University and Dr. Basto Kretschmann. Yes, so you're most welcome also to join us online or here in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.